Hello, good evening, and welcome to this 53rd edition of Old Romans Unscripted, our post-Easter break edition. Of course, today being the last day, effectively, of the Paschal Octave. Of course, the Octave Day is actually tomorrow, which is... Now, how many? Good question for you viewers. What is tomorrow? What is tomorrow's title? Now, those of you who have received and read the Old Roman this week, hopefully will have an idea of what the title is of tomorrow, the Sunday after Easter. That's not its title. Do post in the comments what you think tomorrow is called. You have half a dozen at least possibilities. So it might be an idea to dig out your Latin Missal and have a look and see what titles are given there, or indeed, of course, to click onto the Old Roman, perhaps Holy Saturday's edition, and have a look there to see what tomorrow is called. Okay, well, there's two quick off the mark there in rapid succession. Barbara was first. So yes, Low Sunday. Tomorrow is Low Sunday. That is one of the titles for tomorrow. Shirley just pipped by Barbara there to the post. Philip in Macedonia. Hi, Philip. Dominica in Albis. Yes, indeed. Dominica in Albis is another title for tomorrow. Low Sunday, indeed. Bishop Paul. Following on the heels of Barbara and Shirley. Yes, tomorrow is called Low Sunday, but it is also Dominica in Albis. Now, somebody might care to give the translation of Dominica in Albis, and that would count as another title for tomorrow. Now, there are others who will use that title or a version of it for tomorrow, but that's not the traditional title for tomorrow. But thank you, Mary, for playing. Philip, Antipasca. Sorry, now I laugh because that sounds like antipasti or antipasta. Antipasca. Well, that's a term. It's not one that I've heard in connection with tomorrow. Certainly Low Sunday is, and Dominica in Albis. Thank you, Philip. He liked today's homily about Saturday in Sabato in Albis. Now, there is a clue if you heard today's homily, because Sabato in Albis was translated, so you might be able to translate Dominica in Albis from that. So yes, Philip, you're right. So it is something similar to that. It is something similar to that. Anyone else going to have a go? What is tomorrow also known as? So we've already had, of course, Low Sunday. We've already had Dominica in Albis. Can anybody come up with another name for tomorrow? While you're thinking, there is a brilliant name, a hilarious name, and I'm going to give you a clue. I'll give you, I'll give you two clues, but the first clue is look up the introit of tomorrow's Mass. Look up the introit of tomorrow's Mass. Shirley, well done. Shirley's translated Dominica in Albis, which means Sunday in white. And if you saw today's Mass, then you would know what that means. More of that in a moment. Sunday of St. Thomas Apostle. Well, yes, that is certainly a title for tomorrow, because St. Thomas, also known as Didymus, as the Gospel tells us, that is the Gospel for tomorrow, the Lord's revelation of his resurrection to Thomas and the other 10 apostles in the upper room in the cenacle. But clue number one is look up the introit for tomorrow. Now, while you do that, I shall bring on Bishop Kelly.
I think I know the answer to this question.
Oh, here we go. Hold on before you do, because I'm almost certain you do. But another bishop. There we are. Yes, Bishop Paul has got it. Quasimodo Sunday. Quasimodo Sunday. Now you see, the second clue was going to be Notre Dame. The second clue was going to be Notre Dame. But yes, Quasimodo Sunday, which comes from the first word of the introit for tomorrow. Now, for a bonus point, does anyone want to tell us what Quasimodo means?
All right, we'll leave that to the viewers.
Oh, yes, we'll leave that to the viewers. Good afternoon, Bishop Kelly. How are you?
I'm very good, very good. Yes, wonderful.
Excellent.
And, yeah, good to be here.
How was your Easter?
You know, I have to. This is going to disappoint many people. It was anticlimax. I was so revved up through Lent that Easter. It was anyway. Through one thing or another, I had to attend to other things other than. I wasn't able to take the Easter Vigil, which was really upset me because of circumstances. So that really upset things. But I've been enjoying this wonderful week, the octave. And there's, I was going to say, now we have Easter over us, but of course we don't. We're right in the thick of it, which is great. So it's hopefully it'll build its own momentum as well. So we'll see where it leads. Yeah. I've no doubt it will, because all you have to do is bask in the glory of Easter. The reality of things is right there. So,
indeed. I mean, as we opine. Can you believe?
Plus, I won 120 quid on the Grand National today.
Oh wow! Oh, that's good.
Yeah, half our audience don't know what we're talking about, but. For the other half,
I'll leave you to explain.
All right, for the other half, it's the
for the other half on your side of the pond.
On my side of the pond, it's the British equivalent of the Kentucky Derby. So they weren't even showing it this year in the United States. I had to listen to it on the wireless, like it was 1949. We're all gathered around, So my brother put on a punt for me, as we say, and by George, it came through. So
excellent.
Yeah. Anyway, I told him I divide it among the children and buy them something nice. It was just a £5 bet. That was pretty good.
Yeah, excellent. Excellent, very good. Well, it's been a nice, I have to say that this year, for me, I do remember that when we were last on air 2 weeks ago, we talked about the highlights of the Triduum, and I did opine then that often for me the Easter itself, Easter Sunday, can feel something of an anticlimax because things are almost back to normal. But I have to say this year, joy of joys, it was a joy to be able to celebrate the liturgies with faithful present. The new lessening of restrictions and things meant that a few faithful would be able to be present. So it was a joy on Easter Sunday particularly, rather than an anticlimax. It was really nice to be able to celebrate Easter with others. And then all this week, I always forget, actually, I suppose because you get so sort of intense with Lent and Passiontide and the Triduum, I forget actually in some ways what an actual joy the Paschal Octave is in terms of its richness again in symbolism and meaning and significance, and the stational churches, the accompanying of the neophytes, the newly baptized from Holy Saturday at the Easter Vigil, their week wearing their white robes, being presented to the great patron saints of the eternal city. And then, of course, today, coming back then to our opening question, and then today, Saturday in white and Sunday in white, commemorating. Now, can anyone remember? So, not you, Bishop Kelly. Can anyone remember why? Why is this weekend? Why is Saturday in white and Sunday in white? What does that mean? What is it referring to? Now, hopefully, there's a half dozen viewers I know who heard Mass this morning, so hopefully you should know the answer to this question. Why is it called Saturday in white? Why is it called Sunday in white? And actually, there's a word missing that I referred to in the title at the beginning of my homily this morning. There's a word that sometimes it's just Sabato in albis or Dominica in albis, but there is another word that is often inserted and which refers to the purpose, the what we're actually commemorating. So we'll see how many remember that from this morning. What does Saturday in white mean? What's it about? What is it referring to? The clue I've already given you was about the neophytes and their white garments, but let's see how many come up with the rest. And of course, as has always already been referred to, tomorrow is the Gospel of St. Thomas, and I love this particular Gospel. It always tickles me. I don't know why, but it always tickles me the narrative when it says Thomas, also called Didymus. I think it's to do. Now again, this is a cultural reference that perhaps only those on this side of the Atlantic will appreciate, and especially those of a certain age. But actually, that's another good question. Why would Didymus make me giggle? Why would hearing Didymus make me giggle? I just wonder how many will get the cultural reference that I'm thinking of.
Well, indeed, and we'll wait for those answers. But the very fact that that's inserted into the text is a cultural reference. That's very important.
Yeah.
It's a statement.
Lovely. Well, Shirley, sorry, I'll just put that back up again. Shirley's right, yes. So Saturday in albis and Sunday in albis refers to the newly baptized, the neophytes, removing their white garments. So way back when, in the mists of time, in the eternal city of Rome, those who had been newly baptized on Easter Saturday, newly baptized on Holy Saturday, then a week later on Holy Saturday, removed their white garments. Now, I think for practical considerations, I think it's worth suggesting that they didn't wear their white baptismal garments all day, every day, but they certainly wore them attending Mass, and they certainly wore them at the various feasts that were held in celebration during that week, when they were treated as honoured guests, as the newly baptized, as new Christians, and being Easter week, so they were highly honoured. Here we go. Go on.
No, I was going to say I don't know if you had this tradition in GB, but we had this tradition certainly in Ireland that your Holy Communion, you wore your Holy Communion suit. And of course, for the girls, it was the sort of the white thing with the veil and everything else. But you wore that for several weeks after your Holy Communion to Mass. And I often think, is that a hark back to the tradition?
Yeah, it is.
Perhaps it is, perhaps it isn't. But
the whole notion of wearing white is
white. Yeah.
And bearing in mind that
we were the first year in confirmation that we didn't wear. Well, of course the boys didn't, but the girls didn't wear sort of like a slightly older communion suit for confirmation. Yeah. But there was. It's a way of showing that you've newly arrived and you're celebrating it, and you're honoured and you're proud and you wear those garments that you were received in, be it either baptism or Holy Communion or confirmation, these things that mark your life. It's the same in the Jewish community. For those that aren't Orthodox, they will wear their kippahs for a certain time after their bar mitzvah, in order just to recognize the fact that something has marked a transition in life. So it's
Yeah. Now the tradition of wearing white does ultimately derive from the white of the neophytes, from baptism, and of course, because back in those days, and the whole point, the reason why there is a mass that follows the Easter Vigil is because that was their first Holy Communion. So they were baptized, chrismated, and received their first Holy Communion. And over the centuries, of course, these things have been separated out, for right or wrong. Now, just before I miss it, so Barbara has hit the nail on the head. So this is the cultural reference that makes me giggle at Mass whenever I hear the Gospel narrative say Thomas, also known as Didymus, because it does remind me of the Didymen and Ken Dodd. But Bishop, you were going to tell us about another cultural reference.
Oh, I forget what that was, but I'm certainly not going to explain Didymen to the US. What were we talking about? I wasn't. I thought that was it, about the wearing of the white Holy Communion garments.
Oh, I see. I thought, oh, okay.
Which is more poignant with the girls at Holy Communion, because we just looked like little short guys in suits. But you did wear it. I mean, you wore it to several masses afterwards. I can't remember when you stopped, but it was certainly 3 or 4.
And there was, because there was there was always a party in the church hall after the first Holy Communion, wasn't there? And various little do's would occur. Various some of the wealthier families in the parish would vie to to put on parties,
and that's where it gets ridiculous. But I think it's important to mark these things, and of course. We forget with the early church, it's just slightly before infant baptism. So most of these people were adults when they were coming in. So they did consciously put on the garments. And as you say, they wouldn't have walked around in them because they would be identifiable as Christians. But
and the church took them back as well this weekend. when they took them off, they gave them back to the church. So you didn't get to keep them.
That's curious, because a number of years ago, several years ago now, a friend of mine at work, her husband is a Baptist, Black Baptist minister, and they had a fire at the church, but he had baptisms the next week, and she asked, could she borrow? She said, "Do you have any baptismal garments?" And I said, "Well, I do actually." And it was albs. I give her half a dozen albs for the baptisms that week, which of course is.
Well, that's where the albs come from.
Exactly.
It's exactly where the albs come from.
Exactly, and of course it's full immersion and all in their tradition and all of that. But it's like I give her albs, and she had them all dry cleaned, and I said, "You don't need to dry clean them, just launder them and give them back." But but I thought there's something quite nice about that, or symbolic. I don't know what it was, but I had no problem lending those to her, and it was being used for its original intention. I just hope they submerged them 3 times.
And invoked the right Trinity.
Right, which they may have done, but unless there was a Catholic deacon there, which of course it would.
Well, you can never be too sure these days, Father.
Yeah, you cannot.
You need to get it videoed, recorded, taped.
You got to supervise now. You got to supervise everything.
Yes, indeedy. So Quasimodo. So just for those who are perhaps left hanging in the air, wondering what Quasimodo is. Quasimodo literally means like to, or like unto, or as. So the actual verse says like newborn infants, or as newborn infants, referring, of course, to the rebirth of the newly baptized Christians. Referring to the regenerative and restorative waters of holy baptism that, of course, make us pure and as white as snow, and gives us a default position to aspire to retain or regain and then retain, remembering that the Holy Sacrament of Confession enables us, if we fail, if we mark, as it were, our albs, then the sacrament of confession and absolution is able to take that stain away and put us back to our default position at baptism.
I remember one of my religion teachers at school telling us that every time we went to confession, we regained the purity of our baptismal gown.
Yeah.
And that meant something to me, and I've always remembered that. You know, if you think of something soiled,
exactly,
and you think of the beautiful brilliance of your baptismal gown, or whatever garment it was that was used, it was pure, it was white, it was a rebirth. And every confession is a remembrance of your... In fact, we remember as Catholics our baptism all the time. Every time you enter a church...
Take holy water, yeah.
Or, we talked about this before in the show, every time you leave or enter your home, if you have a holy water font there at the door, you remember your baptism. In fact, even the simple sign of the cross is a remembrance of your baptism.
Yeah.
And because it's so essentially important to who we are as Christians, in fact, it's the only guarantee of salvation that we know of. And so it is fundamentally important to us entering in as being Christians, to the guarantee or the promise of salvation, and we have to conform to the grace that, and also, as St. Thomas Aquinas tells us, all of the grace that is necessary for our salvation is given to us in baptism.
Yeah.
We need no more. No, we need to cooperate with it, but it is given to us in the sacrament of baptism. And this is what the whole Easter period is about as well.
Exactly.
And as we get to the Dominican Albus, is that these people, the neophytes and the catechumens who have become Christians this week, I mean, they really entered into that mystery, which has been somewhat lost through infant baptism. But you get glimpses of it, like my RE teacher telling me that every time you go to confession, your baptismal robe is returned to its brilliance. But there is something to be said that those people really entered into it and took their lives in hands, but they didn't care because they had eternal life, which it's absolutely wonderful. The bravery of them, the commitment of the early Christians.
That's the beauty of this Easter week and of the just as they were in Lent as the catechumen, they were presented to the in the stational churches deliberately to be introduced, as it were, to the patron saints of those places, to be edified by their example, to learn of their history and their testimony and their witness. And of course, on Friday of Easter week, so yesterday, the day before Saturday in Albis, they were taken to the stational church of Santa Maria and Martires, Our Lady and the Martyrs, which of course was the Pantheon. originally a heathen temple, but converted to a church and dedicated to Our Lady and to the martyrs. And of course, on the Wednesday of Easter week, they were presented to St. Lawrence, that very popular deacon and martyr of Rome. To St. Lawrence outside the walls was the stational church, and there particularly they learnt about the importance of the sign of the ictus, of the fish, and of becoming fishers of men, after the fashion of the apostles from that day's gospel. So, and yeah, the witness of the early martyrs of the church, well, indeed, of the Christians generally, it always strikes me, and I referred to it in today's homily, the contrast between the description of the church in the second chapter of Acts of the Apostles in Scripture, and the experience that most of us have of church today. So whereas the Christians met daily and worshipped together, they shared meals together, they addressed each other's spiritual and material needs, but they did that on a daily basis. The Christian church, the Christian family, was put before anything else. That was your first duty, your first obligation, was to your Christian family, to your Christian church. So that, people, the Christians who had work, those who were slaves, would go to church before they began their day's work. And this is where the long history of early morning masses ultimately derives from. And of course, part of the reason why we have the tradition of daily mass now is in emulation of the early church as described in Acts of the Apostles, and the daily breaking of bread and the church family coming together. But it's always a shame, I think, today that our experience of church is not as a great coming together as a real sense of community and family, but instead is of like-minded individuals coming together for a shared experience, but which then afterwards everyone goes back to their own individual lives, and they'll be lucky if they see each other until the following week, as invariably people only go on Sundays these days.
Yeah, no, that's the unfortunate thing of contemporary Christianity. It has become a Sunday occasion, if even that. Sometimes it's just a cultural engagement that happens only as I said, hatch, match, and dispatch occasions. But that whole richness, and of course, I mean, if you're going to break bread for your family, why wouldn't you break it for the wider family where you gather together, And that is the center and the summit of the Christian life is the Eucharist. And anything else we experience, anything else holy we experience, is a share in that. So we have lost it. And I think perhaps, I don't know, but perhaps we're being forced to return to it. That there will be intentional communities that will arise as the structures collapse under the weight of modernism. But we perhaps, just like the early community, will be the richer for it. And of course, like anything out of that, there is always, like the Easter and the spring we are in, there's always rebirth. So perhaps this is a time where the church experiences a rebirth.
Well, I hope so. I mean, that's certainly what I'm praying for and what I'm myself trying to work towards. And I think this idea of deliberate and intentional communities is really the way to go. I mean, that's essentially how the early church missionized. That's how they evangelized.
Yeah.
What was attractive to others was the fact that they could see that the Christians were real family, real community, where everyone was valued, everyone was prized, where collaboration, the sharing of skills, gifts, talents, and abilities, the pooling of them, the putting them together, and realizing projects, and so on and so forth. I mean, it's a shame, really, that for maybe the last 400 years or so, the only, aside from the monastics and some of the religious orders, the other equivalent has been the Amish type communities, the Anabaptist communities, where they've created villages and even towns, but where they live, intentionally and deliberately Christian lives. Now, in theory, of course, the same should have been true everywhere else, for Catholics too, but sadly, somehow, this dualism infected the church, and everybody started to separate. Who's that?
That's Luca.
Luca.
Decided to join us. Better be careful up there. Get the tail singed next to the votive light.
So, but it's it's a shame that this increasing secularization, but the way that people now today separate their faith and their spirituality and their religion from their everyday life, which is not how the Christian life should be lived. If anything, the Christian life comes first and influences everything else. But that's the great impediment to the church's mission today, is the fact that Christians themselves, in many ways, have led the secularization of society by this constant putting and shoving aside faith and shoving it into the private sphere.
No, absolutely. I think I've mentioned it here before, and I think it is on my list to read. I have a book called The Benedict Project. I haven't read it yet.
I've got it here somewhere.
You have a copy of it. So, but it is about that intentional living out. And I've read some criticism about the book, but I think the central tenet of it is exactly what we're talking about. And I think if the church, you don't hear so much about it from Rome, but you do hear about it from the Church of England, for example. It's like, well, what are we going to do, and the new re-envisioning of the church and all this sort of stuff. I think if they actually went back to basics, would suit them better. But they want to try to reinvent the wheel, and there's nothing more newfangled than the latest newfangled thing, and it really is. It's throwing mud at a wall to see what sticks, and none of it's sticking.
Well, I think part of the real issue is that Christians themselves need to be re-evangelized.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the real issue, because if we had confessing congregations, then the church would grow.
And I do like, hats off to the evangelicals for that, because they're much more willing to live their faith out than we are, perhaps. And we've much more understanding of the history of the Christian tradition than they do, and only if we could live it out, and to the whole of Western culture actually depends on it. Our festivals, our seasons, our art, our architecture, all of that is incumbent.
It all derives from that,
It all derives from it. And if we don't rescue it, it's going to be. It's going to be like the pyramids. We don't know who built it and what the purpose was. It's going to be a bunch of people standing around a medieval cathedral, scratching their heads, going, "What's this about?" And we owe it to our own culture. We owe it.
We see. Well, and you see, and it's evident, isn't it, in the kind of contemporary situation and experience. People only come together now to protest.
Right.
Whereas before we came together as communities to celebrate.
Celebrate, yeah.
Even up until the end of the Second World War. The VE Day celebrations, or even the Jubilee year.
Well, yeah, actually, I was thinking about that with the passing of Prince Philip. That
memory eternal.
The celebrations of the Jubilee, and there was a coming together, and it was all sorts of things. You had who was there? Elton John and Take That and all of that. But then you had the pageantry of everything that was. And I was living in London at the time. But it was a celebration. It was a cause for coming together. And people did come together for that. But there really is a loss of it. It's all about anger and frustration now. And
but in many ways, that's because when you take what's common to us all away, what are you left with? And that's the what I perceive to be the malaise in our society, and the malaise in the church too. So much of the progressive so-called theology and all the rest of it that abounds today, where sin isn't sin anymore, and so well, if there's no sin, there's no salvation. If there's no salvation, then there's no gospel. If there's no gospel, then what's the point to it all?
Yeah.
And the trouble is that many people have reached that conclusion effectively, that there is no point to it all, and have reduced their church attendance or whatever to simply being kind of ritualistic, kind of a tradition that we perpetuate, etc. But there's no meaning to it. And the trouble is, of course, is that then anyone who comes to church, they can perceive that, they can pick up on that. These people, why are these people here? Well, we don't know really. They just like singing hymns and whatnot. But the rest of the week, that makes no difference to their lives.
Yeah.
There's you could perceive that there's nothing that otherwise is different about them from anyone else. So then you're left with thinking, well, what's the point then? And that's
But I think we saw some of that recently, unfortunately, from Rome. In the middle of this pandemic, the tendency was to downplay everything. Why? Give people hope. Upplay it. You could. Yeah. I mean, that place is an aircraft hangar. But there he is, as they say in England, sat up at the top end of it. With a few people around. You could have half filled that with people distancing and everything else.
Yeah.
You could have had choirs from the balconies singing. And it gives people a sense of hope at Easter. But it was all downplayed. It was all,
Well, I mean, this week the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, was reported as saying that he now regrets the lockdown that he imposed upon the Church of England last Easter, not last Easter, but the Easter before, where you remember, basically, it was only us and and it was only us and Catholics and everyone still at least broadcasting masses and everything else, whereas the Church of England clergy had been told categorically by Justin Welby that they weren't even allowed to step foot inside their churches. And then he's now this week said that, on reflection, he thought he should have fought more to at least have allowed the churches to be open for private prayer. Now, not forgetting that this is the guy who imposed this strict enforcement, who then broadcast himself celebrating a Eucharist from his kitchen table when there's a perfectly serviceable medieval chapel at Lambeth Palace that he could have, celebrated from. He made a point of celebrating this Eucharist, and then, having told all his clergy that they weren't allowed to step inside their churches, and then, as well, had also said, forbidden the Anglican clergy to offer themselves to the hospitals as ancillaries to the chaplains, and yet himself was walking down the road from Lambeth Palace to St Thomas's Hospital and volunteering, despite the fact that he was over the age limit, that he had categorically said any Church of England clergy of this age and above should be shielding and should not see anyone. And now, now he says in this interview, I think it was in the Telegraph, he says that he realised this come May or June last year, and yet in July he was still insisting that there should be no relaxation, etc. Of the restrictions. I mean, it was appalling. And I know many Church of England clergy who will never forgive him for what he did that Easter. Many who were bitterly and sorely disappointed. Those of a Catholic bent, particularly, but to have forbidden them from even those churches where there's literally a corridor between them, or a doorway between them and the vicarage, and despite the fact that nobody else was going to be in the building, they were not allowed to step inside their own buildings to pray. Ridiculous.
Yeah. No, but I mean that goes beyond the Church of England. I mean, there's a priest who was arrested in Ireland for celebrating Mass and leaving his doors open. The fact that the government shut down Easter services there this year.
In London, did you see in London there was a Polish congregation?
Oh, I saw that. Yeah.
In Southwark,
in the sanctuary.
Well, they were celebrating the Good Friday liturgy, and the police arrived. Apparently, the police were responding to a tip-off that they'd been told that there was an illegal gathering and there were people not socially distancing and so on and so forth. Anyway, what they got there was clear from the video and the photographs is, and what the police never asked was, obviously there were families who were gathered together, but otherwise people were, those groups were spaced out around the building. But what's even more incredible is that the police thought that they had the power even to shut down a public act of worship. Now they don't. And irrespective of that, restrictions
in Ireland they do.
Hold on, the restrictions on on the lockdown for worship have been lifted since last November. So they didn't have a leg to stand on for what they were trying to enforce. Just outrageous.
It is absolutely outrageous. And a court did rule in Ireland that the government does have the right, even though it's in the constitution, to stop worship. But just listen to what we're saying here. The police were responding to a tip-off of illegal. Yeah. This is Elizabethan England all over again, right? Priests in priest holes, and there's been a tip-off that a priest has been seen. So we're right, but come on now, it's But we're so tolerant of everything else. Right? We're so woke about everything,
and Christians aren't being persecuted.
Yeah, I'm about done. I mean.
It's
it has to stop. It has to stop.
It's ridiculous. It
is absolutely ridiculous. And so the Bishop of Derry, because just like the Anglican Church, actually, the Catholic Church and the Anglican Church are on an all-Ireland basis, right? Because they were long established before 1921 and Northern Ireland, but you have the Diocese of Derry, which crosses the border, right? So in the south part of the diocese, the churches have to be locked. But in the northern part of the diocese, where the cathedral is, the churches were allowed to open. So they asked him, the bishop, would he restrict worshippers from the south coming to the cathedral? And he said, well, when Sainsbury's closes their doors to shoppers from Donegal, I'll close the doors of the cathedral. And these things, and I've said it 1,000 times, these churches are vast. We're not talking about little meeting halls here. We're talking about big churches, which, in the best of times, are not full.
Yeah.
It makes no sense.
Sadly, but yeah.
Sadly, yes, of course. But it makes no sense. No sense at all.
No, it is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
But part of it is, of course, is that people don't step up to the plate.
No.
Yeah,
Where's the outrage?
The problem is people
Where's
just
the outrage?
Accept it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why aren't they marching for this?
Right. Yeah.
Why are they protesting about this? But then conversely, that's the other thing is that then religious leaders are at least able to turn around to the government and say, well, look, it's not like we cause trouble. It's not like we make you look bad, is it? So, cut us some slack.
But you're right, they are starting to wake up to it. Like you said, the Archbishop of Canterbury and the new Archbishop of Dublin has also challenged the government about why can't we open the churches in a sensible way, because it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
It's nonsensical.
Yeah. And for most of the past year, I've been at team meetings every week with Public Health England officials and government consultants and stuff, and have heard nothing but praise from them for the way in which those churches who have opened and those faith venues that have opened, nothing but praise for the way they've conducted themselves. Because they followed the regulations, they've had track and tracing, they've had sanitizer available, they've spaced people out in the churches, they've given them masks, so on and so forth. It's not as if these places have been proved to be unsafe, and certainly by comparison to supermarkets, it just doesn't bear comparison, because you go to a supermarket and now, fair enough, outside people spaced out for the queuing, but as soon as they get in there, people are in and out of each other's faces, left, right and centre, grabbing stuff off the shelf. You could be standing there just deciding which loaf of bread you're going to buy, and before you know it, half a dozen people have leaned in front of you.
But it's not just that. It's shopping as usual, and people take something off the shelf and they look at it and then they put it back.
Yeah, and then they put it back.
It's like, it's. I mean, this when this all started, I'm like, shopping is now a stealth practice. You got to know what you want. You got to get in there and get it. No time for browsing, but of course everyone's browsing and putting it back and checking out the nutrition facts and back on the shelf. And I mean, I still wipe everything down when I buy, because it's the most unsanitary.
Well, you never know, do you? You never know.
You don't.
And I mean,
no.
and I've always been quite a sharp shopper, in the sense that I've never been one for browsing. If I go shopping, I know exactly what I want. Invariably, I know where it is. And if I don't, I ask.
Except in a bookstore.
Very rare that I go to them these days.
Are there any left?
And even then, if I go, it's to buy for somebody else. It's usually a shopping list, Christmas list or something like that. And I will go straight to the counter and ask an assistant. I'll go straight to the counter and ask an assistant. Why? Because they can look it up on the computer. They'll know whether they've got it in stock or not, and they'll know where it is. And I haven't got to, because otherwise, with books, I would be tempted to spend far longer in there than is necessary. The worst thing they did was introduce coffee and cake.
Oh, we didn't get that here.
Oh, everywhere you go now, every bookshop now, it's all, has a barrister and a coffee machine and comfy chairs, and people sit there, and I've never understood, because it's not as if they don't seem to police it very well, if the idea is that you're supposed to buy before you sit down and read it and thumb it with greasy cake thumbs. But I mean, if I go shopping, invariably I'm a shopper. I know what I want. I'll go to it, and if I don't know where it is, I will just ask someone from the off. I can't bear otherwise just sort of traipsing around and like Sunday drivers, you get people in shop just amble about willy nilly, and it drives me crazy.
I'm with you too. I hate. I hate the Christmas shopping is the worst thing for me.
Plus, I don't get the temptation.
I have a list, and I'm in there, and I do it, and I get out, and it's But people enjoy it. I don't know, they love it.
Yeah. But and I don't. Well, you see this now. You see, from Monday here, they're lifting further restrictions, so that non-essential shops are opening, including clothes shops. Now, there was an article in a paper earlier this week talking about vaccination passports to go clothes shopping, so that you prove that you've been tested or you've been vaccinated, and therefore, because how is it? Well, because how are they going to police? I mean, I don't know what the risk is, but I mean, everybody likes, women particularly, do like to try before they buy. So what are the guarantees of, are the shops supposed to spray down every time somebody's tried something on? What goes on? I mean, how is that going to be served?
No idea. I do know that Walmart, which is probably the largest retailer here in the United States, they had a no return policy for the longest, and perhaps they still have it. So even if you ordered online for clothing, if it didn't fit, you're stuck with it. We're not taking it back. So I don't know if that has changed or not, but yeah, I mean, I always thought shoe shops in particular were unsanitary. All and sundry stuck in their smelly feet in those shoes, and there you are trying them on. I was never comfortable with that.
Yeah, that's true.
It's true. That's true. And they've walked about in them up and down, looked in the mirror, and then put them back and decided not until you come along. And
that's it. We see, unless you see, because this would be a good way to kickstart the economy again, especially the employment market. Unless, of course, they were to have everything behind glass cabinets, and you had to ask staff I want that, or have you got this in that size, or blah blah blah, because that would then, they'd have to increase the number of shop assistants, wouldn't they, to be able to service the demand. So that would kickstart the economy.
Yeah, it might too.
That would give people jobs and give people's ability to spend again. I don't think they're going to do that, but that would that would be a sensible thing to do, I'd have thought. It's all interesting. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. Whether we'll be sprayed coming in and out of shops. Whether they'll have a mist of sanitizer, a sanitizer mister thing, so that so that will drench you in sanitizer as you walk in and walk out. That'd be good.
Right.
This is a long way from Didymus and.
Oh, absolutely! Yeah. How did we get here? COVID's the answer.
So So anyway, so going back to going back to our original discussion. So of course the whole point of course is that that even though the neophytes gave up their white robes, they did so, of course, with the admonition and the intention not to besmirch their souls, not to spoil their souls, because that's the business of Christianity. That's what we're all about. And of course, those lessons are as true for us all today as they ever were before. Meaning, of course, that those of us who applied ourselves during Lent, increasing our practice and discipline of holiness, as I said, during Lent, should continue. Okay, you don't have to fast anymore, you don't have to abstain anymore, but you should continue that regimen of prayer, of studying the scriptures, etc., that you took on during Lent, because that is the surest way to keep you steady, so that next Lent you don't have to repeat everything again. As we said at the beginning of Lent, the whole point is that what you take on and what you address it this Lent, you do so for the rest of your life. It's not just for Lent. It's not just for the season, but it's for the rest of your life. There is no point every year coming back to Lent and having to address the same problems. Because otherwise you will never feel the benefit of growing spiritually. And so it's important too, post Easter, is not to think, oh well, Lent's over now, so I don't have to be holy anymore. Quite the opposite. Like the neophytes were admonished, you have to keep striving at holiness, keep striving at retaining your purity and your innocence before God. And that does require a real change of heart, a real change of attitude and approach to the way in which we live our lives. And the whole point of our Lenten discipline was to recalibrate ourselves in that mindset, to recalibrate our minds so that we are conscious of God, aware of God, desiring to realize and express and manifest communion with him at all times and in all places, and remembering too that communion with God means communion with each other, and to transgress that communion is to sin against each other. If you sin against God, you sin against each other. Essentially, that was the early church mentality. So we, all of us going forward, need to remember the pursuit of holiness, that grace, that baptismal grace that we receive, that, as His Excellency said earlier, St. Thomas Aquinas said, is enough to see us, and all we have to do is collaborate with it. All we have to do is cooperate with it, and all we have to do, if we need to, is avail ourselves of more of it as and when necessary, by availing ourselves of the sacraments regularly, particularly of penance and of Eucharist, and keeping our hearts and our minds open to God.
I think you hit the nail right in the head there. We often talk about after our Lenten experience, which takes a lot of effort. Nobody's trying to say it doesn't. But we often say after, well, we bask in the light of Easter. Basking in the light of Easter takes effort. Because exactly what you said, you've got to keep up what you've achieved during your Lenten discipline. Basking in the light of Easter is not a passive thing. It's an engagement. It's an engagement with our Lord, an intimate engagement, which demands purity, which demands sinlessness as far as we can achieve it. That's where intimacy is found. That's where engagement is found. So it is not a passive thing. It's a very active thing in our part. It's a very active part of the Christian life. In fact, it is the Christian life, is that engagement with our Lord. So I think sometimes the language clouds what our responsibilities are, which is an active engagement with the Easter light, which is effort, because you got like you just said, it's but I think we lose that though.
We do.
It's kind of like it's all over now. It's like people who go off the booze and then they spend the next 2 weeks getting drunk. It's what if?
I mean, I have to say, I'm what's intrigued me this year, my own personal experience, is that I've actually found this time I don't want to go back to the eating habits that I had before. I've actually, sort of learned. I mean, I've still got this. I've still got a way to go. But I didn't do it for this. I didn't do it, necessarily to get rid of this. But I have, praise God, been able to recalibrate, my approach and my mindset and my appreciation of food. So even though, I mean, I've still got a huge Easter egg, and I'm not even interested in touching it. It's on the shelf. It's a beautiful Bournville dark chocolate egg and a bar, and it's on the shelf, and I'm really not interested. And likewise, I've been quite happy with one meal a day, and I'm sort of quite happy continuing with that. So it has,
My Easter egg hasn't made it out of the boot of the car, actually. Trunk for those who are watching this side of the pond. Actually, it hasn't. It hasn't. And
what I am looking forward to. Yeah. So what I am looking forward to, because what I have deduced is that part of the reason for this has been because of the lockdown and not being able, to go out. So I am looking forward from Monday being able to jump on a bike and, go out, and hopefully have reason and cause to go out again.
Yeah. I think this whole thing has put things in a new perspective for all of us. But I do agree with you. I think my Lenten discipline I've learned this year, and I don't have a desire. I don't have that childish desire, right, where you would go off chocolates or sweets for Lent, and you store them up in this humongous jar, and then you just make a pig of yourself. I don't have that desire, and I think that's where the penny drops. That you don't want to return to your former self. It's about a renewal, and I think even though Easter has been a bit of a not a letdown. I won't want to say that, but it wasn't what I expected.
Mixed bag.
But I have learned. I had a good Lent, and that I think has done me well.
Well, and that's the key, isn't it? I mean, it's we've I mean, obviously we were doing the Angelus, and now we broadcast the Regina Caeli every day. And at lunchtimes, we're still giving the meditation for every day in the year by Bishop Richard Challoner. And one of the things noticeably he said this week for post Holy Week and in Easter, he said if you hadn't sacrificed anything during Lent, then the joy of Easter will not be joyful for you.
Right.
Because what will it mean?
Yeah.
If you didn't make the sacrifices, if you didn't, cinch yourself, then what difference will it make for you? None very much at all. Sage words, wise wisdom from
absolutely.
Good wisdom from Bishop Challoner this year. I've always appreciated him, but I'm glad I made the point this year of broadcasting the meditation every day. Because it does help. Yeah. It does help. And I realise, of course, that his turn of prose is very 18th century. I've tried to read it in such a way as to convey the meaning in those places where sometimes the use of words and things is perhaps not as we would appreciate them today. But I know some certainly have messaged me and said that they've appreciated that. So I think we'll definitely continue going forward with that. But it did make me think, actually, there's maybe a need to publish a more contemporary version or transliteration of his meditations. There was something, of course, that came up in the formation conference recently. Was they all complained that they found 18th and 19th century English difficult to read.
It is difficult to read if you can't read contemporary English.
Well, but as well, I mean, and that was only on history. That wasn't even philosophy or theology. But yeah, interesting, I thought. And I think, you know, that's part of the thing, isn't it? Today, everything is made easier all the time. You know, rather than make the effort to try and understand and to research, as it was, you know, at least when we were studying. Today, everything has to be simplified and made easier.
But yeah, and what you lose is that you don't engage with the turn of phrase. Now, yes, it is difficult, but if you try to understand it, and you know, it gives a richness or a vignette onto the society of the time as to why things are phrased in a particular manner.
Well, I mean, all that furore over consubstantiation.
Oh,
no. What was that? Was that the term? The new the new English translation of the Creed.
Oh, to be consubstantial with the Father.
Yeah. And the fuss that people made over that. Well, nobody understands what that means. Well, then look it up.
Yeah, exactly. Learn.
It is in the dictionaries. You know, have a bit of catechesis around it.
I know.
Shock horror.
And if you had any sort of education, you could work out exactly what it means. Substantial.
I mean, substantial. Con means with.
That which stands other. Yeah.
Oh, look at us. We've turned
back
into grumpy old men.
Grumpy old men. It's Waldorf and Statler here in the
Well, that does bring us to the end of our time. Hopefully that didn't get too negative for you towards the end there. And it's great to be back post Easter.
It is indeed.
And we hope you all did have a good Easter, a blessed Easter. Thank you to those of you who both very generously made Easter offerings. And to those of you who signed up as Patreon sponsors for the channel. Please, we do need more. As I said previously, if it's only a few shekels a month, if everybody who viewed gave only a few shekels a month, it would keep the thing afloat and keep it going without having to be helped out. So please do consider becoming a Patreon patron if you haven't already. The schedule this week for Old Roman TV will return to some form, for some semblance of normality. Hopefully you appreciated that this week we kept things fairly simple so that I could have a break and a little bit of time to myself. But from Monday, there will of course be the 8:30 Mass, the midday Regina Caeli, the 6 o'clock Regina Caeli, and Rosary returns. Recitation of the Rosary returns at 6 o'clock daily from Monday. So do join us for that. Programs begin to return. Obviously, our Saturday night program, Old Romans Unscripted, will return tonight. On Monday, the Domestic Church returns to our screens from 6:45 p.m. GMT +1. And then some new programs will appear over the course of the next couple of weeks to pique your interest and to accompany you in your pilgrimage of faith and sojourn here on earth. So do keep tuning in. We try to keep things simple and regular. So if you remember, 8:30, 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock every day to tune in with us, and the rest will all fall into place. You'll get notified of the rest if you only do that much. And bless you, especially those of you who joined us for the liturgies of the Triduum and for Tenebrae particularly. It was a great comfort to me, actually. It's not easy being in a chapel by yourself chanting the Tenebrae office, and it was nice to know that many of you were joining in, or at least watching and accompanying me spiritually during that time. And as I say, we were blessed this year to have some of the faithful present for the Triduum liturgies. But bless you all for your continued support, and do feel free to give feedback. Do feel free to make suggestions, even if there are topics or subjects, not just for discussion but for programs or whatever, that if you would like an A to Z on the order of the traditional Latin Mass or something like that, do let us know, and we can develop programs for that. Bishop Kelly, of course, is still champing at the bit to give his art history series.
Yeah, sure.
Which we have the capability to pre-record now. It doesn't have to be live. So we just need to arrange mutual convenient times to do that. But there are things possible. I am always trying to encourage other clergy to participate as well, so that you get to hear things from a different perspective, or another voice at least. So stay tuned. Bless you for your support. May you continue to have a blessed Easter, and this Paschal tide. Don't drop your guard. As we said, continue to persevere in holiness and in striving to realize communion with God and each other. It's all about charity. It's all about love. Bishop Kelly, would you be so kind as to give us a blessing?
Absolutely. And I will say that from us here in Chicago, in the United States, condolences on the loss of the Duke of Edinburgh.
HRH, thank you.
And eternal rest grant unto him, O Lord, and let life perpetual grant unto him. May he rest in peace. Amen. The Lord be with you.
And with thy spirit.
May the blessing of Almighty God, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost descend upon each and every one of you and remain with you for all time. Amen.
Amen. Well, it's goodbye from him.
And it's goodbye from him. The other way.
Yeah, that's right.
That way. Ultimately,
and this was
that way.
Yeah, ultimately. Yeah, anytime soon. Get me off this crazy planet. Bless you all for watching. As always, if you enjoyed the show, this was Old Romans Unscripted. If not, this was Methodist United. We will see you next week. Take care and God bless.
Bye for now.